Moving right along with the second segment on today's episode, sticking a little bit here with wide receivers, now moving into the AFC South and focusing in on the Tennessee Titans and their wide receiver one, DeAndre Hopkins. Will this be the best wide receiver group in DeAndre Hopkins' career? That's what he was asked last week on his feelings towards all the new additions coming into that position group. Specifically, he said in an interview, "I think this is one of the best wide receiver groups I have had the chance to play with on paper." And to give a little bit of context, if you guys aren't aware of it, to start, the Tennessee Titans hired former Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan, and it would incline people to think that this offense now, with Brian Callahan coming in, will be centered more around the pass. And because of that, because they were coming from a system with Mike Vrabel and really focusing in on the run, especially because they obviously had Derrick Henry, they had to use him, and they had to really use him a lot in a lot of games where he got over 20 carries probably consistently. And now with Brian Callahan coming from a system where the Bengals religiously used a lot of spread formations, had three very valuable wide receivers, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase. Now you would have to assume that that sort of style will be brought over here to the Tennessee Titans. And wide receiver one, you had Jamar Chase in Cincinnati. Now you have DeAndre Hopkins, who, if anybody had any doubt about DeAndre Hopkins, despite a bottom five offense, a poor O-line, and two different quarterbacks at different points of the season, DeAndre Hopkins still accomplished his seventh 1,000-yard season in 2023. So there isn't any doubts about DeAndre Hopkins. It's just who can they really surround him with to help him out here a little bit and just help out the team a little bit more, especially Will Levis, who is going to really benefit the most from this in his second year, trying to learn a whole nother offense. Can he benefit from this? And DeAndre Hopkins, sure as heck, thinks that this team can definitely do something special with them signing Calvin Ridley in free agency to a pretty big deal, a pretty big contract. But just off of the season that he had, he was the Jaguars' number one wide receiver, over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. He actually mentioned to reporters that he knows he's 29 years old, obviously, but this offseason, he really feels like he's only really 25 years old based on how he feels and how he's attacking this offseason. So some more encouraging words there from Calvin Ridley to really have two wide receiver ones here on your team, I believe, in my opinion, for the Tennessee Titans. And not to mention, you also bring in Tyler Boyd, signing him as a free agent wide receiver, probably the best one remaining on the market for the Tennessee Titans. He had a lot of meetings with other teams, but he decided to reunite with Brian Callahan here in Tennessee. And he, on top of just being a very reliable option, bringing that veteran experience a little bit with being 29 years old, I think his biggest virtue and his biggest addition to this team will be that familiarity he has with Brian Callahan's system, obviously running it in Cincinnati, bringing that over to Tennessee, not only to help the wide receivers, obviously to make it a little bit easier for them, but having to help Will Levis a little bit, being more of a reliable option for him because he already knows the system. Will Levis can maybe look to him as being that check down, reliable option on third down, whenever you need to get a play on a crucial point of the game. I think Tyler Boyd can really fit that role very well, and he's still, not to discredit him a little bit just as a check down option, but I think in the pecking order he would be number 3, but in a lot of situations I really feel that Tyler Boyd could be a number 2, a very good number 2 on a lot of different teams. But the Tennessee Titans have an excess of riches now at that position. And back to the main question, is this the best wide receiver group in DeAndre Hopkins' career? I think so, just based on comparing it to the other teams and the other options he's had in his past. He's played most of his career with the Houston Texans, so that's really where we're going to start with all of this, basing it off of that and looking at what he had in Houston. You start off here from his time in Houston when he got drafted in 2013 to 2019, a good period there where he could have had the opportunity to play with a lot of different options from that time period, but these are really the 4 main options that he had as support systems to really sort of help out and base his performance off of in Houston. You have Andre Johnson really coming in there as a rookie. He played with him in the early stages of his career. Will Fuller more towards the end, but I'll get to him in a little bit. Kenny Stills as well at the top left, and Kiki Kuti on the top right. That's really the four main options that DeAndre Hopkins really played with during his time in Houston, and it is a credit to that team for getting to the playoffs on a few different instances with the wide receivers that they had. But just there in Houston, as some of the options that he's had, in no time in his career has DeAndre Hopkins ever had another wide receiver to put up 1,000 yards. In this time period with the Houston Texans, where he spent most of his career, he had no other running mate, other fellow wide receiver to put up 1,000 yards except Andre Johnson in his rookie year all the way back in 2013. That's the only time DeAndre Hopkins ever had another wide receiver put up 1,000 yards that wasn't himself. It's been about 11 years now, 12 years now since that happened. So that's one thing. Andre Johnson, and Christian Kirk, who I'll get to in just a little bit, also got the most yards that any number 2 wide receiver has had alongside DeAndre Hopkins, I should say, only tallying about 900 yards as the closest ones. Andre Johnson did it one time in 2014, and Christian Kirk did it one time in his time with the Arizona Cardinals. That's really it. So in 2 other instances, any other wide receiver he's played with has only tallied 900 yards. Then after that, it's only been 800s, 500 yards, 600 yards, and in some instances where you see Will Fuller, he really suffered a lot with injuries during this time, so he wasn't really a reliable option at the crucial point of the season. And with that, the team really suffers, and just based on that, I think looking at the Texans situation, you can't really compare it to that. There really is no comparison. I think Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd are much better options than the options right now you see on the screen that DeAndre Hopkins had at his disposal. Then, if you fast forward a little bit into 2020 and into 2022, these are the next 4 best options that DeAndre Hopkins had during his time with the Arizona Cardinals. You see Larry Fitzgerald there, Christian Kirk, who were there really in his early stages with the Cardinals in 2020 and into 2021. Then you get into A.J. Green in the bottom right there. Spent a little bit of time there, not as long, maybe a season or 2 with the Cardinals in 2021 and 2022. Then you get to Marquise Brown there in his last year with the Arizona Cardinals in 2022. So, again, all right options. Maybe Marquise Brown and Christian Kirk are the better ones for DeAndre Hopkins there in his time in Arizona. But A.J. Green and Larry Fitzgerald, where they were in their career, you could say they were just past their prime, so they really couldn't contribute as much to the team and to help out DeAndre Hopkins, to take away some of the attention that always seems to be on him at that point in his career. And Christian Kirk and Marquise Brown also, I just think, weren't really ready yet to step into that role. You see Christian Kirk now, and I think he's a very solid number 2, a very established number 2 that could get close to 1,000 yards, maybe even a little bit over. But again, at that time, I just feel like he was too young. And same thing goes for Marquise Brown. It didn't really, start to blossom for him until the season after DeAndre Hopkins left. So that's really what it is in the situation with the Arizona Cardinals. And most wide receivers are, I think, out of all the options I just showed you on those 2 graphics, the 4 on your screen now and the 4 previous, I think all of them are more compatible to what Tyler Boyd can produce for the Tennessee Titans nowadays as a number 3 than a legit number 2 receiver would. That's just I think what the facts say based on where these guys were in their careers and the production they produced. I think that'll aligns more with what you'd expect Tyler Boyd to produce this year as a number 3 than somebody who could go in there and really challenge opposing defenses to attract some of the attention away from DeAndre Hopkins. And most teams, again, talking about Calvin Ridley, would love Calvin Ridley as a number 2 option if they had the luxury of that, let alone a number 1 option. There's a lot of teams that, like the Jaguars and a few others, would have Calvin Ridley as a wide receiver one, but on this team in Tennessee, he is the number two, and that just shows, I think, the options that the Tennessee Titans have. And I, again, if you couldn't tell already, I think this is for sure the best team or the best wide receiver group, I should say, that DeAndre Hopkins has had at his disposal. And because of that, you get into thinking of a longer question, a future question. Is this enough to get him maybe into the playoffs and have a legit chance of moving on to the playoffs? I think that in combination with them addressing O-line a little bit, the defensive line as well, and defensive back through free agency, I think it makes them a bit more well-balanced. Just as an example, you add L'Jarius Sneed, you add T'Vondre Sweat through the draft, you add J.C. Latham as well to solidify that offensive line, and I think it all just makes this team a bit more well-balanced and more harder to pick out a legit, weak point in this team's roster. Do they have enough to make the playoffs? They recently made it in 2021, so it's not like they had a full rebuild of this team. There are some still good pieces that they can build on and that they have built on to make up the team that they have now. And it really, again, depends a lot on Will Levis and how he develops in his second year with a new head coach. But they have, I believe, a really good chance to compete for that second spot in the AFC South realistically, because I don't think they have enough chemistry speaking right now to compete with the Houston Texans. But why couldn't they get second in that division? You're competing with the Colts and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Calvin Ridley just left the Jaguars to join Tennessee, so that's obviously hurting them and helping the Titans. And the Indianapolis Colts haven't really been a legit contender and haven't really been competitive in recent years. They have Anthony Richardson, they added A.D. Mitchell, and Josh Downs, I think, is a very good player. But because Anthony Richardson got hurt, you don't really know what to base off his production and his progression up until this point, because he missed most of his first year. I anticipate him sort of being eased back in and learning it all, not all over again, but some facet, almost having a second rookie year, which is unfortunate because he had very good years. So because of that, and Jacksonville, not really getting that much better, why couldn't the Tennessee Titans be number two in that division? They certainly have the experience, now a more balanced offense. The quarterback is, again, the biggest question, but I have confidence in Brian Callahan to get this job done. They've really done a good job of addressing the wide receiver position, and now they just have to execute it. I think there will be certainly some hiccups, but I'd like them to take the number two spot in that division. Will it be enough for the playoffs? That's a different discussion. But in the division, can they make the playoffs? They can do it, but it all comes down to execution and how lucky you are in some instances as well. But we'll leave that conversation there, and we're going to move on with the rest of the show. A few more topics to talk about. I mentioned the Nico Collins deal that was announced about an hour ago. We're going to get into that. Some rookie notes from OTAs. I touched on just general notes in OTAs before. Now we're going to get into specifically the rookies, and also talking about Patrick Queen, the reason why he signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, betraying the Baltimore Ravens and signing for their bitter rival. He gave an explanation, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But for right now, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break.